Hello, everyone. I'm Ismail Civico, and welcome to the Youth on Air podcast. So today we have on board, we have Bisi, which we've been working with on some. Hello, Bisi. We've been working with you for quite a lot of projects, actually, and we thought it was awesome to have you on board and speak about this specific topic because, which is hate crime. Of course, we're going to get a bit more into details a bit later. Hate crime against the LGBTQI plus community, which is something you have been working on quite a bit. And following especially the recent events in Belgium, we thought it was very a contemporary matter to actually speak about, and very important in not just in Belgium but in Europe in general. So let's start with you, because of course this podcast is about you. This episode is about you. So what can you tell us about you? Who are you? Where do you work? Where are you from? A bit in a nutshell. Who is Bisi?
Great question. So thanks first of all for having me. I'm really happy to be able to talk about this topic, and I hope it will be interesting and informative for everybody. So my name is Bisi. I'm 23 years old. I live in Brussels. I'm from Germany and from Benin, and I identify as a Black queer lesbian. So I am part of the LGBTQI community, and I am also a racialized person. I used to work for the Rainbow House Brussels, which is the umbrella organization in Brussels, which kind of assembles many different LGBTQI organizations. Now I don't work for them anymore, but we still collaborate on some projects. Amongst them, the Brave New You project, which is a youth project where we work on hate speech. So not really hate crime, but we will see that both are linked. And yeah, that's what I do and who I am in a nutshell.
Yeah, we'll get about hate speech a little bit later, because there are some links, and I think it's interesting to let's say dive a bit into both topics, which they're not exactly the same thing, but you can find some links between the both, and we can speak about that. I do have a question. So for how long have you been in Belgium, more or less?
So I've been in Belgium. I think this is my fifth year. First, I used to live for 3 years in Louvain-la-Neuve, so more in the French-speaking part in the university city. And it has been 3 years that I'm living in Brussels in different neighborhoods. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to be very interesting too, because I'm going to ask you a bit if have you seen any differences specifically now? Have you seen any differences between being, let's say, a queer lesbian in Belgium and in Germany, for example, or does that stay pretty much the same in those two contexts?
So the thing is that I haven't really lived for a long time in Germany since I started to live my identity as a queer person. So I grew up in Germany, and then I traveled. I lived for a few years in Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And then I came to Belgium. And let's say when I started really exploring my identity and living my identity, I was already in Belgium. I would say it's similar in Germany to Belgium. I think the biggest difference is really if you're in a rural area or in a bigger city. So I am from a rural area. And of course, like there's a huge difference between my hometown village in Germany and the capital of Brussels.
Yeah, I think I do agree with that premise, is that indeed in cities generally you have so many different people in the end that it's a lot easier to integrate within the society. But when you get into more smaller rural areas, there's more like a homogeneity in the people in themselves, so it's a bit more difficult. You can stand out a little bit more, so integration does become a little bit harder in that context. When it comes to LGBTQI plus community in Belgium, we can cover the let's say different sexualities or different gender expressions if you want, but how can you live your life in Belgium generally? Is it okay, like, to hug, to kiss, to walk in the street, or are there some, let's say, some moments where you do feel uncomfortable in just living your sexuality in this country?
I think it's quite a difficult answer. It's neither black nor white. So on the one hand, you have this legal situation, which is great in Belgium. Belgium was one of the first countries to legalize same-sex marriage. Adoption is also authorized here. So from a legal point of view, the laws are very gay-friendly, and there is absolutely no problem, let's say. But the reality isn't following up this legal framework. So unfortunately, no, you can't hug, kiss, and just display your homosexuality or your trans identity or a different gender expression in public. sometimes you feel maybe very comfortable and at your ease and confident enough to do it, but for sure you will be confronted to many looks, many weird looks, comments, unasked comments, be it sexualized comments or like homophobic comments. And then you also risk, in the worst case, physical aggression. I think everything really depends on with whom you are, in what kind of mental state you are, at what time you're going outside, are there people around you or not? So there are different factors, but it's definitely not so easy to be queer in the public space.
Yeah, and did you see I mean, I get all of that, especially because I mean, I've lived in Brussels also for 10 years, and I've been out with a lot of friends that are either gay, even more feminine heterosexual men also that get the same kind of looks or of comments, or in bars maybe. But I did get the impression though that it really depends in the part of Brussels. And I think I'm not entirely sure what to take out of that. I'm not entirely sure what to take out of the fact. Is it Brussels in general, or is it, let's say, the education of different groups of people within Brussels? And that's really what gets me a bit into a dilemma, because I'm not really sure how to interpret that. So do you think, because we agreed on the fact that on a legal point of view, to some extent, there are quite a lot of liberties in Belgium. That's exactly why when we spoke about, well, we're going to do previously about queer refugees, that Belgium is one of their first stops, because here they do get, let's say, a lot easier access than in other European countries. So on the legal sphere, it is kind of okay, but there's still a big issue in terms of education of the general population. And I think you're right with that both didn't follow up. Like, you have the legal system that really started to get quite progressive in its time, and then afterwards you got the education that is a bit tailing behind. So how do you wedge that gap? How do you see the education following up? Or is it the culture, or is it a bit like the religion in Belgium? If you have such thing as a religion in Belgium, if you will. What's your take on that?
So I think that's a good question, and also a very delicate question, because of course when we talk about homo and transphobia, many people and political parties are very quick to try to point on fingers certain part of the population, especially doing Islamophobic comments, and basically they are trying to appropriate an LGBTQI plus discourse. So, okay, let's say we are pro-gay, we are open, and these people come to our countries, open as we are, and they are the problem and the root of homophobia in Belgium, which is totally false. So homophobia, which is also deriving from sexism, is as much widespread in these communities as it is in, let's say, the classical Belgian white Christian communities. There is not more or less. It's really, you cannot stage something like this generally. And also the kind of statistics that sometimes politicians want to make to kind of know which neighborhoods are more dangerous. Most of the time, these statistics, at the end of the day, they aren't even useful for the victims, be it sexism or homophobia. Because, okay, maybe we will have some numbers. Let's say, okay, there are more people, there are more homophobic crimes. What the government do, they will send more police officers. They will try to criminalize the people around there. But at the end of the day, the root of the problem of homo and transphobia is not at all taken into account. So I'm really careful when I talk about homophobia and transphobia, because I do not want to add more to the stigmatization and discrimination of racialized populations. And also because being a Black queer person, I know all the cliches and stigmas that come with it. And that you must be very careful and understand that as much as in European culture, in the African culture or Asian culture, queers have existed for a long time. And actually, these countries are alleged to be homophobic, not because of their political way of being, but because once they were colonized, all of their history on sexuality and gender, etc., kind of erased, and the European heteronormative standard got set up on it. So it's really complicated. So I would say definitely education and religion plays a role, but for me, like education and information is way more important and concerns all the neighborhoods, all of the people living in Belgium.
I think it's interesting you brought up history in a way, because history is something that we cannot disregard when we speak about all of this. And it is true that it was the Europeans that brought, for example, not even Europeans, more like the Francophone Europe, let's say, more into Africa when it comes to the Napoleonic Code, and that was where in legal standards homosexuality was banned or was criminalized in lots of countries. So there is an historic context to that. Now we live in the present, and we see these historic residues, let's say, that keep in some communities, whether if you want white communities or even colored communities coming from abroad. And I think you're completely right when you say we don't solve one issue by creating another, right? So we don't solve the issue with let's say spreading acceptance towards the LGBTQI plus community by spreading hate towards another one. And I think that's a very big issue with this specific topic, is because people just find it so easy to say, oh, it's not my fault, it's the fault of that dude there, I have nothing to do with it, just say it's his fault. And then it just becomes basically a ping pong game of who can attack the most a minority, let's say, and just put all the blame on them.
And I think that one of the things that may explain the recent insurgence of hate crimes with the death of David Paul Vliet is also the lack of representation and visibility in the media and in everything that surrounds us. And this lack of representation, visibility cannot be solely traced back to, let's say, racialized communities, but it's a product of like wider society, of our economic structure. So I think like representation in the media, in the political spheres, it starts to come now, but it's very, very, very important. If we never see queer people in television, in the journal, in the political spheres, especially, I don't know, queer people in the situation of handicap, or queer people who are racialized, of course, wider society cannot imagine these people existing in the way they are existing. So I think like the media and everything we consume in television or journals really play a very important role that unfortunately they do not always fulfill.
Yeah, so you're speaking more about spreading awareness, let's say, so people are aware that people like this exist, and they're just like you, they're just like me, it's just like the other person across the street. I think is it in Belgium? Correct me if I'm wrong. You probably know this better than I do. There's now a transgender minister. Yes, and there was interesting the comments you saw on Facebook. Like it was so hyperbolic, let's say, in some ways, because I was trying to see, okay, we have. I mean, and then they were like, so many debates within the debate saying, oh, this is good or this is not good. People saying, honestly, I don't care as long as they do their job right. But I think this was a good step into saying, okay, transgender people can't do the same job as another person because it's just the same person. It's just their gender identity that changes, let's say, from the biological or the way they were born. And there's not much to say about it. And I do think maybe this hyperbolization of an issue that, in theory, in the sense that gender is not that big an issue, just let people be however they want to be, but people really do want to make this like the story of the century, or yes, just making definitely it so big.
On the one hand, it's great news, and of course people are surprised, because indeed there was never an openly transgender politician as far as in the top as it is today. And at the same time, we want to be like, okay, this should be normal. There should not be a whole discussion, and for 2 weeks all the journals filled with these news. I think it's the same as I don't know, for the first female presidents or vice presidents, or for the first black presidents. So these are all things that should be normal, but unfortunately they aren't, and so they create this huge debate. But you touched upon something I also wanted to talk about, on why today we have like this reinsurgence of hate crimes. So I don't think that there are more hate crimes than there were a few years ago in Belgium. But I do think that there's more awareness, more activism, and that it starts to be recognized, let's say, by also parts of society who do not feel concerned by this topic. And I think social media plays a very, very important role in enabling like these hate crimes or generally homophobia and transphobia. So as you said, in these kind of articles, you can find very nice comments, but you can also find a lot of homo and transphobic comments. As soon as somebody, like a journal, will post something on a queer topic, you will always have a lot of people who will comment really nasty and violent things. And this is in a country in which we are supposed to not be homo or transphobic. So I think social media, of course, it's like really extreme. People feel anonymous, people feel protected, and may say things that they won't say in real life, but still it's really a good mirror of what really is going on in society and how many people might think about these topics.
Yeah. I think that into the issue of social media is even more complicated into the overall conversation, because social media and the internet is just like a lawless ground. It's somewhere, it's just like the jungle. Nobody feels any accountability for anything they say or anything they do, which I don't think that directly translates to what's happening in reality. The issue with this is that social media actually does sometimes show the way people actually think beneath how they act. So that maybe is also an issue, the way people think, and that's why we can take social media as an example on, okay, these are the thoughts that some people are having. And coming back to this, because this is the main topic I wanted to bring also, well, the reason why I wanted to do this episode, it was following now the murder or the killing of a young gay man here in Belgium. And apparently, I'm not sure if my numbers are wrong or the information I got, but it was the first, let's say, sexually motivated murder since 2012. So there has been, in comparison to the countries, I mean, I've seen this. That's being positive. That isn't that bad, right? So my idea is, what do you think happened now? How come now? Maybe is it let's say the COVID pandemic has turned people mad in a bit. They've tried to put the blame on anyone. Is it just the same people that were always there, and then it was maybe just the situation, the time and the place, just pure luck? How do you explain this kind of crime that is still happening today in 2021, and the last one was 9 years ago?
So yeah, your numbers are definitely right. So the first, let's say the first recorded crime or recognized as such a hate crime was in 2012 with Issam Jafi, who was also a young Moroccan man who got captured, tortured, and killed by 4 people. And I think, of course, before 2012, there were other homophobic and transphobic crimes. It's just that they weren't treated and weren't recognized as such. And now after 8 years, there's another one. So yeah, I would say that these are the most tragic and violent events that happen, and that
yes, exactly.
Again in the public sphere and make people discuss it. But it's really just the top of the iceberg. So like violent homophobic and transphobic attacks happen every day, and it's just a matter of time that something goes wrong, and that with premeditation or not, these violence escalate at a point where people really do die. And I know that most of the hate crimes or homo and transphobic discriminations and aggressions are not reported, so they are just going under the carpet. And this is why now it seems such a surprise, because we haven't heard about these kind of things for 8 years, but they are happening. It's just that we are not really aware of it, or the people who are victims of it are not sharing it. But I think, as I said before, I think like there's a big lack of like representation and visibility. And then I also touched a bit upon the subject of sexism. for me, both are really linked. Sexism enables really homo and transphobia, because finally the fear of, for example, the gay man, of the effeminate men, or of a transgender woman, is really rooted into sexism. It is in the belief of, okay, we have two genders, we have men and we have women. Men are supposed to be men, women are supposed to be women, and both are supposed to get together, have sex, make babies, and everything which is outside of this is unnatural and unnormal. And so, be it gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, everything that diverges from this norm, from heteronormativity, is a threat to this system. So all of the homo and transphobes are sexist, and many people who are sexist may also be homo and transphobic. So both are really linked, and if we don't have this discussion about sexism too, like homo and transphobia will not disappear. And then I think lastly, it's also, just a widespread homo and transphobia that we are not fully realizing, and that is not always these kind of violent aggressions where somebody dies. Most of the times, it's really way more subtle. It's, I don't know, parents who have nothing against gay people, who say gay people can marry themselves, but who are a bit uncomfortable seeing two men holding hands in public, or who would say, okay, they can be gay, but not my son. So these are like very recurrent things, and these people don't consider themselves homophobic. They think that they are open, but at the end of the day, they are not, because they would not accept this for their children, or they are not giving like using the same standards of what is public affection and what can people show for queer people and for heterosexual people. And for example, the killing of David, so the three youngsters who robbed him and killed him. So now police is kind of investigating, and they found out that these youngsters were part of, let's say, a group or a gang of pedo hunters. So people who track pedophiles, or who claim to track pedophiles, but in basically just want to rob these people. What happened also with David. And these are young men who are using, let's say, this excuse of pedophilia to rob people, and they could have used any other excuse or choose any other target group. If they choose this excuse of we are hunting pedophiles and we are robbing gay men, it's because in their head, being gay means being a pedophile, or being at risk of being a pedophile. So this is like huge misconception, a huge cliche that I don't know, they use, or that they really believe, and which ends in these kind of crimes. Yeah,
I think that was a narrative that was inserted in end of the 20th century, if I'm not mistaken, maybe in the 70s, 60s, something like that, that gay people were pedophiles. And I think that's something that maybe for some people it's still a belief. It's still a really hardcore belief, and I think that's a big issue, because again, we're coming back to the generalization of what is homosexuality, and that homosexuals are pedophiles, because then why would they be interested in men, and lots of different issues. I like the fact that you brought up that this hate crime is indeed the extreme on where it can go, but in between you have all these different things that are happening throughout the day. I mean, it's more common, for example, beat-ups, hitting someone in the street, or following them, or making them uncomfortable, or calling them names. And when we speak about the legal term crime, maybe that can be up to debate, but it's still attack on the LGBTQI plus community. It's still some sort of hate crime in a sense. So how do you deem the importance, let's say, would you be more to saying, okay, for example, some people would say, okay, that's fine. I mean, everyone gets comments in the street. And then other people would say, but we need to stop when people get killed, because that's not good in either case. And I really have a hard time visualizing right now what would be the best approach onto tackling both. Because you have one extreme, which is indeed the killing of innocent people. And then you have the other extreme where we get more into hate speech, right? And this is a bit, and in the in-between, it can be like the evolution from hate speech towards hate crime when it comes to calling a person a name, making them uncomfortable, hitting them up to the end to killing them. That's the escalation. How do you see this correlation between hate speech and hate crime in a way?
So I think hate speech enables the hate crime. So without hate speech, there would be no hate crime. There is not just a person getting up in the morning and deciding like this, okay, today I'm going to stab a gay person, or what happened in the US today, I'm going to shoot Asian persons with Asian descent and kill mainly Asian women. So there's always a narrative behind that justifies these kind of crimes, except if the person really is completely mentally deranged. So, and this narrative is based on hate speech, be it being part of an internet group where you rant about foreigners and gay people, for example, or feminists, or against the Asian people. It always comes from somewhere. And the hate speech must not necessarily be expressed by the person in itself. It can simply be being surrounded by people who foster this narrative and consuming it through videos, through articles, and kind of interiorizing it to justify your hate. And yeah, so both are linked, and without hate speech there would be no hate crime. And the hate speech in itself comes from like the misconceptions and the lack of information and education on these topics. So not understanding what does it mean to be a queer person, what is transgender, what are transgender identities, and not to feel threatened by it, because at the end of the day, these people who are homophobes or transphobes, or who do homophobic hate speech or hate crimes, either they feel threatened in their system of beliefs, in their values, they feel attacked. They want to defend themselves from an invisible threat, from a non-existent threat, or they are part of an ideology, or they want to, they feel threatened. They want to defend themselves. So it all stems from like a lack of understanding and a lack of information on these topics, which really messes everything up. So I think the key is really like the education. It starts there, because at the end of the day, of course, what is important is also to punish the authors of like hate crime, of hate speech, to have laws that are efficient, to have centers where people are comfortable enough to come and complain, and that things are like happening on a legal point of view. But this is just when the action has already happened. This is like the sanctioning part. But in order for the situation to get better, it's not enough to just work on this part. We need to work on the preventive parts to make sure that these things don't even happen. And this is in the education. I mean, it starts in kindergarten, in school, with the training of police officers, with the training of the social workers who work in refugee centers. It starts, I also think, maybe with quotas, as we do it with female quotas in politics, in society, like in industry and stuff. So yeah, and also with money, of course, like funding the organizations, the refugees for queer people, the centers against discrimination, all of these civil organizations that try to act on the field against hate crime and hate speech.
Yeah, we can get now a bit, because we have around 15 minutes left, so we can get around the end of what can people do. And I think this is the most important part, because then right now we laid out the issues, the consequences of those issues, but then of course we need to find solutions to those problems. We can't just, okay, it's always good to spread awareness and to speak about the problems, but most importantly is to see how we can solve these problems. But first of all, I would like to give a bit more bit more in-depth definition maybe, or how would you define a hate crime? Not necessarily when you look in the dictionary, but how would you define it? Is it just a comment based on hate speech, or is it really goes up to the killing? What's your definition of that?
So a hate crime does not need to come up until the killing. So I don't really know like the legal category of the crime and offense, or crime.
Not legally, not legally specifically.
No.
Like your definition. How would you define
but,
it?
Yeah, it's a crime. It's an attack based on a person where the intent is really to create a prejudice against this person, and the choice of the person is because this person belongs or seems to belong to a certain group, so a certain social group. So be it a certain ethnicity, be it the fact to be a part of the people with disabilities, be it to talk a certain language, to have a certain religion, or of course to have a certain sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. And the interesting thing is, and I just Googled that before, so in Belgium we have this law since 2003 that adds more penalty to hate crimes. So to all of the crimes that create prejudice against a person and that are motivated because this person belongs to a certain social group. So this law exists since 2003. So we see, okay, legally the law is it's really modern and etc. But the category of gender and gender expression, gender identity was only added in 2013. 2013. So there was kind of a gap between first, okay, we will include in what is a hate crime race, ethnicity, disability, language, sexual orientation, but it also took some time for the legislator and so for society to understand, okay, there's not just sexual orientation, there are also transgender people, or there are people who dress differently from what their gender or the gender imposed upon them expects. And so, yeah, I would say this is the hate crime. And then consequences of the hate crime make it a hate crime. So not only, of course, the victim is traumatized, in distress psychologically and or physically, but also like the consequences on the community, the social group to which this person belongs, and like the wider public. So like the community, let's say a queer person was attacked, the wider LGBTQ community, and this has been measured like psychologically, will be more prone to depression, to anxiety, and just to a climate of terror because they feel, okay, there is a threat, we are being targeted, we don't feel comfortable, for example, holding hands in public space, using dating apps like Grindr, meeting people you don't know yet. And in wider society, a hate crime creates divisions and factions. So you will have the community, which has been attacked, and then you will have the perpetrators, and then you will have, let's say, the rest of society. And it kind of divides the group that is a victim of the hate crime from the rest of society because it's like such a specific target. So maybe the rest of society doesn't really feel concerned because, let's say, they are not gay, or they are not Black, or they don't have a disability. And there's also like the danger of the hate crime, not only that it hurts, of course, the victim, but it really excludes the group which is targeted from the rest of society, and it destabilizes like the integration, like the inclusiveness of wider society.
Yeah, it is that. It's just basically the continuous persecution of these minorities that does give them like a state of fear to these people. Like if they see someone in their town that has been attacked for that and they are like them, of course you're going to be scared because they say, okay, I could be next one, or that could have been me. I could have been at the same bar, I could have been on that same street. That person could have been me. And then it is true that creates a whole situation of distress for the person. And that, yeah, and anyways, I'm going to try and be I mean, it's just such a complicated situation, because it is true that if you see people like you that are being chased around, it's only but normal to you around be scared to even step out of your house or walk around or be in those same areas where your peer was, because in the end you are under that same threat of being attacked or being called names, or in the worst cases being killed. I want to see now with you, because now you brought the third party into the society. We saw the perpetrators, you saw the victims, and then you saw the external society, let's say, that doesn't really feels concerned with one or the other. What do you think, let's say, an individual can do if they see a hate crime, if they experience it, or they hear about it? What do you think is the best approach for a person, just one that doesn't feel identified with one or the other?
So I think when a hate crime or hate speech happens in public space and you are witness to it, the most important thing is to react, but to react while keeping yourself safe also, because we have seen it. People have also been attacked while they were trying to help other people.
That happened here the other week, I think. That happened here the other week.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
The hairdresser who put on like a queer flag, and his window got smashed.
No, that wasn't it. It was actually a man that was going to defend a woman that was being attacked by four men, and then the woman got away, but the guy got stabbed by these four men. And yeah, of course, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that's also, people are scared of that. I mean,
yeah, that's really, so that's the question of civil bravery, and there's always a risk of yourself getting hurt. I think the most important thing is to create like solidarity and awareness in these kind of situations, to feel, to interpel the other persons around you. Hey, what's happening here is not normal. Hold this man. Call security. Let's try and include this person which is being attacked. I think the worst thing to do is to ignore it, or to do like, okay, I'm not part of it. It's not my problem. Sometimes it can also be, for example, playing like a role. So this happens more in sex situations, when you see, for example, a couple disputing, the man getting really violent. You can, for example, go up to the woman and do as if you were friends, and ask her if she wants to go this way, and then just, if the person agrees, of course, go with the person this way and try to isolate her from the perpetrator. So there are different strategies, and I think you can look everything up. I think there are great YouTube videos on like how to try to de-escalate situations while keeping yourself so physically aware. But I think, yeah, the most important thing is to react and to get help if you are not feeling like, okay, you can handle the situation by yourself. And then I think outside of the situation where it does happen, it's really to talk about these issues and to connect yourself with the community which is under attack. So just because you're queer doesn't mean that you're not touched by these subjects. I mean, this is an attack on one person. It's an attack on everybody. So the first thing is to get educated on these subjects, to understand what is happening, and then by yourself try to change mentalities, because we all have friends, we all have family members who are maybe racist, maybe homophobic. That's, unfortunately, it is what it is. And I think, of course, it's great to talk like to the wider public, but the real work starts in your intimate circles, because it is the hardest. But if everybody can have discussions, more discussions with their family, with their parents, with their grandparents, or aunties, or brothers and sisters and friends, this would already like help so much. So yeah, informing yourself and then educating at your level, and of course listening to the people's experiences. I think that's also very important. It's always the people who experience these discriminations who know best what's best for them, what strategies to use, and we should really listen to their expertise and their experience, and just be a good ally to their causes.
Yeah, I mean, the change in education starts in the private sphere. So to try and bring up more the topic, try and speak about it more, try and spread a bit more understanding, awareness on the issue. The solution you brought back before, like what to do when you see like some sort of harassment in the street, is very interesting, because for me, the one that has worked best, let's say, is the friend one. So this is funny, because there was this girl that was here with her friend, and basically we met her, it was around 3 years ago. I actually had her on a podcast last year. I invited her onto a podcast, and she's from the USA. And basically what happened, I was in the bar with my two friends, and then she was being harassed by 3-4 guys with her friend. And then they weren't lesbian, but they were acting lesbian so that people don't go to, that was also like kind of a defense mechanism to say, no, we are together, don't bother us. But the guys just kept, and then we saw that, and then we were like, and then we just had a random name basically and say, hey, how are you? And then we just left space on the table, and that really worked. And I think especially in public spaces that's maybe the best solution to have, is that if the person knows what you are doing, then the person knows it. So just shout out a random name, say, how are you? It's been a long time, or whatever. And I do think that's the most maybe safest way of helping someone that is in that situation. And I'm saying it by personal experience that has worked. We're not asking people to jump on the gun directly, because of course you need to assess the situation and the kinds of danger you can put yourself into also, but just trying to see the best situation to get. And I really do think that's the thing that has worked best in a way.
Right. It's like a great and a safe approach. And also you have the time to, like, if the person needs your help, like they can react, they can reach out, they can say hi back, and they can join you. So yeah, that's a great
yeah, exactly. It's what happened. It's really what happened. And they saw what we were doing, and then they said, oh, how are you guys? And it just said random names, and they just came on the table, and then they waited for 10 minutes, and then they left basically. And that is something that in a bar, of course, it's more in a bar or in school, for example, or wherever, in a more public space where lots of people are there, it is safer, of course, because it's not the same as in an alley. I think if it comes down in the middle of the night in an alley, best choice you can do is just call the police directly. And I think now we're going to speak about that before we finish, and very, very shortly. Do you think the police take seriously these allegations or these attacks, or when they are reported?
I think that's a difficult question. So there are great police officers. There are also, for example, in Brussels, the Rainbow Cups, who are an association of LGBTQI police officers. They are a specific instrument that police created to accompany the victims of like homo and transphobic crimes. So this is like on the one side, but then on the other side, since homo and transphobia and sexism are systemic and widespread in all of society, they are also widespread in police. And it would be really naive to think that just because they are police officers and they are told to not be homo and transphobic, they are not homo and transphobic. So there are many cases where police was asked to intervene, for example, in homo and transphobic situations, and where the situation was not taken seriously. I think that's the first problem, or that the police officers were just disinterested in it. And this, of course, and then also when victims of homo and transphobia went to the police, that they were confronted also like with disinterest, or it's not serious in the offense, or even like homo and transphobia in itself by some police officers. And so, of course, like these events really diminuate the trust of the community in the police, even though they are told, and there may be some LGBTQI friendly police officers. So in reality, there are not many crimes or discriminations and offenses who are getting reported to, because the community doesn't feel safe, doesn't trust the police, and prefers to not go there. So this is like one of the main reasons why the numbers, the official numbers, don't correspond at all to reality. And so there's also civil society, which tries to kind of like, make up for this gap and propose, for example, tools as the Rainbow House, where you can come and report homo and transphobic crimes parallel to the police, to just have like a parallel statistics. But it also doesn't work so well, because these kind of tools really need to be visibilized. There needs to be like social assistance, psychological service, and it's just, there's just a lack of tools, I would say, and funds to really make it efficient. And so, I think also that police needs to be educated and informed more, that there needs to be also harder sanctions for police officers who are homo or transphobic, or who do not react appropriately and kind of are disinterested or negate like the gravity of the offense. And yeah, this also starts with education and formation trainings, obligatory mandatory trainings. What are LGBTQI people? How can you host them properly? How to react? How to accompany them? What to do with internal situations? So this is also like a big how do you say?
A big
Chantier.
Oh yeah, okay. So a bigger okay, how would you call this? A bigger construction site, let's say. So a bigger, a longer term project, like how to do it. But this is more like, I mean, there are a lot of long-term projects that still need to be more assessed, not just in the police force, but in society, in schooling, for example, which we didn't really cover, but that's also a big issue, in families, in culture. There are so many different spaces, but right now we need to see a bit, what can we do in the short term, let's say, or bit by bit, to start building up to this end game where we want to do at the space where no more hate crime is committed, where no one based on their sexuality or sexual expression or sexual orientation is attacked, let's say, just by being themselves, basically. What do you think, to really shorten up here at the end, the LGBTQI plus community is doing apart from these spaces? Do you think that's the only thing they're doing, or can they do a bit more in opening maybe more spaces, more organizations, psychological, let's say, help towards people? What are the answers to this?
I think there are many great initiatives in Brussels and in Belgium, be it like psychological support, victims groups, help for parents of LGBTQI persons, events, of course. But I think, yeah, it always comes back to a lack of inclusion of these topics into wider society, and then just a lack of funding and support. So of course it's great to have these spaces, and it's really important to have them, especially like places who try to be more safer than most of the spaces. But at the end of the day, we still have to live together, all of us, which is good, but which is also risky. So at the end of the day, the focus should really be on how to integrate, and how to not integrate, let's say, the LGBTQI community into the normal society, but how to make the rest of society aware of these topics, so that the LGBTQI community doesn't feel excluded from the beginning. So there are many things done by the LGBTQ community for the LGBTQI plus community, but there could really be done way more for like the non-LGBTQI people, so that they are aware of what's going on, who are these people, what are they doing, and then that they can support even more the LGBTQI community with funds, with like material help, becoming a volunteer, sharing information, sharing news. So I have the impression like it's really kind of hermetic and separated, and yeah, like this wall should be teared down, and there should be way more interaction and exchange.
So yeah, so it's basically a bit more wider society in a way that does need to do a bit more of effort, because they're not doing enough. The LGBTQI plus community generally is doing quite a bit, because of course they are directly concerned. What we need a bit more is understanding with the other spheres in society, where they need to start giving more from their side, let's say, pushing a bit more. And that third party we spoke about before, not the perpetrators, not the victims, but that third party that needs to move a little bit more into that same direction. I mean, I think we spoke about a lot of different things. I mean, this conversation can go on for hours, days even, especially when we can cover education, which that was mainly one of the main issues. But I'd like to ask you first, because we are closing now, what would be your closing words? What would be, for example, your advice, either a young queer person, a person that feels identified with the LGBTQI plus community, just a heterosexual person that doesn't feel identified with this? What would you tell them for these kind of situations, both for a queer person and both for a heterosexual person?
So yeah, I would say to the queer persons and to the non-queer persons to not be afraid of their identity, to understand and know that there are many more people, that there is nothing abnormal and unnatural, and that they should not be afraid of showing who they are and living their identity and reaching out if they need help, because we are here, we are queer, we will help each other, we will support each other. And I think for the non-queer persons, it's also to not be afraid of the unknown. Simply, there is the internet, which is a great source of information. You just need to look, you just need to ask the right questions with respect, of course. I mean, we are all humans at the end of the day. Nobody will bite you as a heterosexual person for being heterosexual or for not knowing all the answers. That's okay. Just don't be afraid of us, and be open to get educated, to get informed, and willing to learn and to grow.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the information is always there. You just need to know where to look and when to look, which is the internet, basically. And anyway, on those closing words, I would like to thank you a lot, BC, again for joining. Again, I'm Ismo Civico. This was Youth on Air podcast, and we're going to see now for the. Thank you very much for listening for the whole hate crime speech and hate speech podcast, because I think it was a very, very interesting topic indeed. Again, thank you very much, BC. Would you like to say goodbye to the listeners?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It was super great to talk about all of these things. And yeah, don't hesitate to follow everybody on social media and to look up all the things we said. There's so much information. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
We'll be sharing all that. Thank you very much for joining, BC.